Thank you. And my buddy said, "What did you do on the weekend?" And I said, "You don't want to know." "Come on, what did you do?" I said, "No, you wouldn't believe it anyway." Well, we partied up big time. We stole some of the old man's booze and we got really sozzled and we had a great time. In fact, we're still a bit hungover. I said, "Well, that's nice." They said, "Come on, what did you do?" I said, "You wouldn't believe it." They said, "Don't be such a spoilsport. What did you do?" I said, "Okay, Friday night after lectures, I went to the airport. I got on an 11-hour non-stop flight to Tokyo. By the time I got there, it was early morning. I went to the car auction depot. You've got to understand, in Japan, when a car reaches the age of 5, it is banned from the roads. It's to prop up the domestic production thing, and it's to keep the fleet of vehicles young and therefore safe. So when a car approaches the age of 5, its value plummets. You can pick them up for a song. So I buy a car there, I don't know, 300,000 yen or something. They don't take checks, bank checks, or cashier's checks as they're called here in the States. They don't accept credit cards. So you had to use 10,000 yen notes. And you peel them off. And I buy something like a Toyota Wyndham. In fact, that's one there. And you've probably never heard of a Toyota Wyndham. Because what in Japan is called a Toyota Wyndham, outside of Japan is called a Lexus. And I'd pick one of these up for about $5,000. And I'd pay another $2,000 to have it shipped in a container back to New Zealand. And then 5 weeks later, it would arrive. I'd change the catalytic converter to conform to New Zealand regulations, and I'd sell it for $30,000 as a young student for a weekend in Tokyo. So I explained this. I bought the car, then I'd go to Akusaka or Akihabara, and I'd party there. And on Sunday night, I caught the flight back home, and here I am at lectures. And they looked at me and said, "No, you didn't." And I said, "I told you you wouldn't believe it." But my point in raising all of this is sometimes it's not enough just to talk about something. You've got to go out there and do it. Einstein said, "Thought without labor is perilous, and labor without thought is labor lost." You've got to combine the two. So what I want to impress on you today is we're hearing lots of great things. Haven't the other speakers been just superlative? I've learned a lot, and you may notice, thank you. And also thanks for the team for putting this on, Daniel and Ling. I sit in a room, most speakers, they fly in, they do their bit, and they're out the door. I've been here every time I learn something. And here's a funny thing, the more you learn, the more difficult it is to learn an extra little bit of information. But the more you know, the more valuable each little extra bit of information is to you. That's why if you've read a book that's really good, read it again in a year or two, and you'll learn even more. So it doesn't stop there, the story of cars, because my containers that I ship them in used to go back empty. And I thought, I've got to figure out how to export cars to Japan. So I realized that they had an exclusion to their 5-year-old rule that if a car is over 30 years old and it's deemed a classic, then you can get an exemption license. And it turns out that in Japan, they particularly liked Mark II Jaguars. And if things are working according to plan, all right, we'll come to that. I'll show you the Mark II Jaguars in a moment. So I'd put my Mark II Jaguars in a container. I'd paid $10,000 for them. And when they asked me how much I wanted, I just doubled my price. I said 20. And then I'd go back to the shop where they were being sold, and I saw that they'd doubled the price again. Right? But you've got to take use of these opportunities. And how come I could do that from New Zealand and no one does it from America? Have you heard of anyone in the US doing this? No. Because the steering wheel here is on the left-hand side of the car, right? It's the left-hand drive. In Japan, it's right-hand drive, just like Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, a bunch of other countries. I know you'll all think this is the better side, but whichever country you drive on, whichever side of the road you drive on, we all give way to the right, which is probably a good thing. Imagine if you had to drive on the other side of the road and then give way to the other direction. But here's a thought. If you're going to give way to the right, you're better off driving on the left to increase the distance between you and the approaching car. It's just a thought. Also, roundabouts are self-cleansing in other parts of the world. Here, they're self-clogging. But that's a technical detail we won't go into. But it's important to know these things, guys. You've got to read more. You've got to get rid of your social media. Turn your TV off. TV rots the brain. You're reading and watching a scriptwriter's fantasy where they're trying to get your attention long enough so that you'll suffer the ads, because that's their revenue model. So as I always tell people, if you want to do well in life, take your TV and toss it out the window. If you want to save some money, I'm all for saving money, open the window first, but get rid of that TV. Because what happened is a delegation of Americans went to Japan, and they said, this was back in the 80s, we import 4 million Japanese cars a year. And in the history of mankind, you have only imported 40,000 of our cars. And we want to change that. And the Japanese thought about it and said, well, we agree with your numbers, and we agree it should be changed. But when we build a car for sale in the US, we put the steering wheel on the left-hand side. You Americans have still to build your first right-hand drive vehicle. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It's interesting. So, you've got to travel more. I've been blessed. I've ended up on stages all over the world. I've taught people. Here I am with Brian Tracy and Robert Allen. We're holding each other's books. Does anyone remember Jim Rohn? One of the greatest that ever lived. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, along with Earl Nightingale and Vic Conant. Here I am with Jay Abram, the #1 marketer in the world. We did an event throughout Asia called, what was it called? Masters of Wealth. And here I've been teaching at Tony Robbins Wealth Mastery for over 2 decades. And the interesting thing is, I never went to Tony and said, hey, can I teach on your stage? In every case, they asked me. And you've been given lots of facts and figures today about how to improve your business. But I want to give you some hints as to how you can increase the power of your influence. And you can tell it in languaging. And English, unfortunately, is a particularly bad language for appeasing yourself in front of others. It's typical to write an email in English, for instance, that says, I received your email, and I read it with interest, and I really like the ideas that you expressed. Do you see how often we deployed the word I? I received your email, and I read it, and I like your ideas. Instead of the emphasis being on the other person. How about the ideas expressed in your emails are brilliant? We haven't used the word I. When you think about it in English, I is written with a capital letter, and you is written with a small Y-O-U. Now in Dutch, and I've got someone in the audience who can verify now, thank you, Peter. In Dutch, I, which is I-K in Dutch, is written with a small letter, and you, which happens to be the letter U, is with a capital letter. It's you. In French, you have a difference for my French-speaking compatriots here from Cameroon and whatnot. We have the difference between vous and tu. One is honorific to a grandparent, the other one is less so to a grandchild, maybe. Same in Dutch, u and je. These are subtleties that we don't have in English. In Japanese, there are 5 levels of honorificness, depending on who you're speaking with. So what I've done, but I had the pleasure and honor of learning Japanese as a kid, so I could go to Japan and do deals like this by speaking the language. Sometimes I could do great deals by not revealing that I spoke the language. Is that a lie of omission or what? But all these things give you power, and it's the power of influence, and it's what you have with your personality. How can you influence people in a good way? It's got to be beneficial to both sides. If I drumbeat someone into doing something and agreeing to something, and they regret it from midnight onwards, that's not the makings of a good deal. But many people think they've got a good product, they've got a good price category, and they go to this foreign country and they barge in and they shake hands, and the deal isn't done because they didn't realize that you're supposed to take your shoes off, and you're not supposed to shake hands, and you're not supposed to toss your business card on the table. These are all offensive, and you might say, well, if they're offended by that, don't want to do business with them. But you'll miss out. It is so easy to do business. And I know that we're saying we've got AI to do our translation, and we've got Zoom for meetings, we don't need to travel anymore. I'm telling you right here and now, if you can travel more, you will do more deals. Because there's no substitute for a face-to-face meeting. And I've done it to an extreme. I'm embarrassed by it. 2 days ago I was in Malta. Yesterday I was in Germany on my way back. I'm still jet-lagged. But I was given a logbook as a kid. That's how old I am. every kid got one. This one was from Qantas, and I'm one of the few that's kept it up. I've got 8,800 hours in here. That's more than a year in the air. That's not gate to gate. That's wheels up to wheels down. That's ridiculous. A year of my life in the air, but you get to travel a lot doing things, and it's kind of fun. By the way, Alexis Wong was talking about Asia and how that's the center is. If you remember Jim Rogers at all, he wrote the book Investment Biker, went around the world with his girlfriend on a motorbike after he'd made whatever, 3 billion or something. He said, if you want to be anybody in the 20th century, then you will be based in Asia. If you wanted to be anyone in the 19th century, you had to be based in the US. In the 18th century, in the UK. It's shifting. Now, we don't have to physically move there the way he did, but we've got to be aware of these things. Now, you're very lucky, because I was at an event in Tampa, gosh, about 4 years ago. And they said that, when they saw me speak, they said, we want you to be the doc in a program using the actual car, the DeLorean, from Back to the Future. Do you all remember Back to the Future? Michael J. Fox? Well, I got to do that, and I got to sit in that car. And I went to the future. And I came back, and I'm here to share it with you. So that's the good thing about all these experiences you get when you actively take part in things. Now, I've got to keep an eye on the time, because we've got limited time, obviously. All right, here we go. I'll hold it up this way. And there we go. Border-free business. What do we aim to do? Well, it's how you go global with confidence, and you can all do it. Because everyone has confidence, you just sometimes don't realize it, right? So here's an interesting thing. Fewer than 1% of American companies export. In California, you're blessed, it's slightly higher, but not by much. There are about 100 million companies in this country. Fewer than 1% export. And here's the sad thing. Of those that do, 80% export only to one country, and usually it's Mexico or Canada. It's a road trip. So you think about it. Oh, that's a double up on for some reason. You can increase your business. How do you do it? Send more emails, hire more staff, borrow more capital perhaps, ask staff to work longer hours, spend more on SEO, and if you don't know what SEO is, you've got to find out what that means, and now engage someone to do that. Or you could just export. And what if you did export and import and/or? Because right now in the US we've got about 328 million. Globally we've got 7 or 8 billion. Not all of them will be clients, but many of them could be. So when you do international trade, the world is your oyster. We'll move on from that. Here are some of these other cars that I wanted to talk to you about. These are the ones I'd export back to Japan and double my money every time as a student. Now, I've got other things that happened. In New Zealand, we had merino wool, and they used to hand knit these ladies' coats with them with beautiful floral patterns. They were about $800 back then. This is 40 years ago, so worth about $2,000 now. So I took one with me to Japan. And I went to what I thought was the most expensive shop on the Ginza. The Ginza is the Rodeo Drive of Tokyo. And I showed it to them. And, oh, it's good. And they said, we'll buy as many of them as you can bring. And I thought that was odd because they hadn't even asked the price. So again, I doubled my price. Instead of $800 my cost, I asked the equivalent in yen of $1,600. So on my next trip to buy my next car, I filled 2 suitcases with 12 of these things. Good thing, good move. Except going through customs this time, for the first time ever, I was called over. And they're very correct there. They all wear suits. They have gloves on. They open your suitcase very carefully. And he pulled out this first coat. And it was obviously a woman's coat. And he looked at me and looked at the coat and looked at me. And I thought I have to say something. So I said, it's for my Japanese girlfriend. And I was hoping he'd say, okay, and close it. But he proceeded to pull each of the remaining 11 coats out one at a time, looking at the coat and then looking at me. And I didn't know what to say, and I said, many Japanese girlfriends. And he could tell that I was concerned that I'd been caught red-handed, right, not declaring something. But he went through the process, he folded them up beautifully, closed the suitcase, and as he pushed it back towards me, he said, sir, here in Japan, there's no import duty on garments. So I think he knew what I was thinking in that process. But it's all going out there and having fun, guys. You've got to experience these things. If you've been to Japan, you know that they make food, plastic models of food that look so realistic that when you look at it and you see a steak or something, if you're not a vegetarian that is, your mouth begins to water. It's so realistic. And you turn it over and you can see the mold that it was made in with a number or something. It's obviously not real food. Your mouth stops watering. But when you turn it back, it is so compelling and convincing that your mouth starts watering again. Well, I didn't see that here or anywhere. So every time I went to Japan, I used to have photos with me of restaurants that wanted plastic food made. I'd drop it off at the beginning of the week. By the end of the week, I'd pick up my boxes of food and ship it back, usually in one of the cars I'd put in a container. It's just you're limited only by your imagination. It is pretty realistic. So here's the point about it. The Super Bowl, back then, that was the most watched program ever. 113 million people watched the Super Bowl in 2011. The most recent Super Bowl was watched by 115 million people. And remember, only 1 million companies export, and only 200,000 export beyond Mexico or Canada. 115 million people watch a sports game, the outcome of which doesn't affect them financially, and only 200,000 people do trade internationally with Asia, where it can benefit not only them, but the whole country. So my favorite saying that I came up with for this is, if we put as much effort as we currently put into sport, into export, then we would all be astonishingly wealthy. It's a very interesting thought. And there you've got it, the export. So I've traveled all over. There I am in Zambia. I get to meet with government officials, the Minister of Trade and Industry and the Minister of Tourism. They invited me to meet with Robert Mugabe. That's the only head of state whose invitation I've declined, because I didn't want to be seen by our three-digit organizations as colluding with someone that had, how can I put it, to be correct, a dubious background, shall we say. But I've had the pleasure of meeting with a lot of officials from around the world. Oh, that's another story we'll get onto. In fact, well, we'll get onto it now. So for my Ph.D., I worked on sonar systems. Are we still doing? Yeah, we've still got 3 minutes. I'll go very fast. As I said in the hall, the human brain's capable of accepting information about 7 times the rate of normal speech. In fact, when you speak faster, you can hear more. People who speed read comprehend books better than those who read slowly. So I'll speed it up. So I worked on dolphins. They have a sonar system. They actually have the biggest brain relative to their body mass of any mammal. And 90% of that biggest brain is devoted to audio signal processing. So I worked with dolphins for a lot. I became, if you like, a dolphin whisperer. And we use their sonars for lots of things, but they couldn't do what I needed them to do. So I switched my attention to bats, not as cuddly looking or friendly looking. They're actually the most prolific mammals on this planet. And you can have 10,000 of them in a cave that's pitch dark. They're all flying around and they don't collide with each other. They're navigating by sonar. So I modeled their sonar system. Here they are, just some photos of bats. They're actually friendly little creatures. And we ended up making, if I can, whoever said the battery, oh, that was some of the work we did. All right, I'm pushing more vigorously than this. So we made spectacles for blind people, kids who were congenitally blind, so that they could hear their way around. And you can hear the difference between cotton and nylon. And I can't describe to you what that sounds like and why there's a difference, no more than you can describe to me why a peach tastes different from an apricot. But once you know what a peach tastes like and what an apricot tastes like, you never confuse them. That's how clear it was. And the look on the faces of these young kids when they could figure out what was in their spatial surrounding is priceless. But the work invariably led to medical things. That's how I got into the medical world. We made the first non-invasive cardiophone. It's a way of monitoring the valves of the heart, the mitral valve and the tricuspid valve, to see if it wasn't closing properly or leaking. And we used to record those recordings on cassette tapes, send them by courier. I'd receive them every morning and I'd listen to them. Oh, well, these are all the ways we do it now. It's far more modern. Anyway, I was minding my own business, working on my spectacles and my cardiophone when the US Navy came to visit me. And they said, we're having mines left in US harbors that are dormant. Ships can go by and nothing will happen. but they can be activated by a remote acoustic pulse, supposedly sent across the Pacific. And then they're active, and the next time a ship goes by, off they go. And the best military sonars couldn't find them. And they said, we've been reading your papers, do you think you could? And I said, well, we better do a calculation. And they said, how many months do you need for that? I said, well, you're here, let's do it this afternoon. So we did. I said, yes, it should be trivial. Now, back then, I was on a stipend of $1,500 a year. And it wasn't US dollars, it was Kiwi dollars. It was next to nothing. And they wrote out a check for $72,000 and slid it across the table and said, would this make a difference? Well, back then, that was like $1 million. And I said, of course it will make a difference. But I can't see the invisible strings attached to that check. Will I disappear in 3 years' time and my mother will never know what happened to me? And anyway, we came to an arrangement. So we worked on that. We found these things. And now fast forward, we're going back a couple of years. We opened a clinic. I was the chief technology officer, and then I'll finish for Top Doctor. You've all heard of Top Doctor? 100,000 magazines a week going to all the GPs. And we were visited by General Anthony Tater, the Undersecretary of Defense. And I was introduced as the chief strategist, and he pointed his finger at me and he said, I know you from somewhere. And I said, well, probably not. If so, it might be some of my books on real estate or investing or going global. He said, no. And he went for a tour with our CEO of our new clinic that we'd opened in the Four Seasons in Brickell in Miami. And he came back and said, you're the sonar guy. You're the one who saved our butt back in the Cold War. So it just shows your reputation goes a long way. The most important thing you can do is twofold. One is you've got to have integrity. And we don't have time to go into that here. And the other thing is that my new Dutch colleague mentioned, and that's when they bring these young people across for transnational collaboration. You've got to show them how they can influence people, because without influence, you're nothing. We have the best product out there, it's the cheapest price. And people won't buy, and you won't understand why. To figure that one out, you've got to change the way you come across. Right? And I think, yes, I think I better call it quits there so that I give equal time to you, Stephen. Thank you all very much. There's obviously a lot more to be said there. I've provoked you on things, but I appreciate you very much. Thank you all.